You have to understand something fundamental about human behavior, and female psychology in particular. Attention is never neutral. It is never just attention, it is an energy transfer, and in the same way currency inflates an economy, attention inflates an ego. When you keep giving it freely without her having to earn it, you're not only feeding her self-importance, you're reinforcing a belief in her mind that she is above you in the social hierarchy. And once that belief takes root, once she begins to see you as just another source of validation, you've already surrendered the leverage. When a woman's ego is inflated, especially in the context of dating, she will unconsciously or consciously treat you as an option she can take or leave at will. That's not because she's inherently cruel, it's because human beings in general respond to abundance by valuing it less. If you're always available, always quick to respond, always chasing, there is no scarcity, no tension, no curiosity. And without those elements, attraction becomes lopsided. Most men don't realize this, and they keep making the same mistake over and over. She pulls away, ignores them, or becomes distant, and their instinct is to close the gap, to chase, to send longer texts, to call more often, to try to prove their worth through effort. But every ounce of that effort is energy, attention, validation, and it is all going straight into the very thing you want to diminish, her ego. You think you're closing the distance, but you're actually making it wider. Why? Because in her mind, your actions confirm that she is the prize to be pursued, that she is the one dictating the terms. It puts her in a position of psychological dominance, and let me be clear, dominance in relationships is not about control in some aggressive or manipulative sense. It's about who feels they have the power to walk away. The person who is willing to walk away and mean it holds the true power. That's why the first and most important step in lowering her ego, especially when she's ignoring you, is to stop feeding it with your attention. You have to break the cycle. You have to recognize that every text you send when she's not reciprocating, every attempt you make to get her to notice you, is like pouring gasoline on a fire you're trying to put out. And here's where most men struggle. They think withdrawing attention is about playing games. It's not. It's about self-respect. It's about aligning your actions with the reality you want to create. If the reality you want is one where she respects you, values you, and sees you as a man of high value, then you cannot act in ways that scream, "I will tolerate being ignored just for the chance to talk to you." That's not high value. That's not masculine strength. That's dependence, and dependence is the root of all diminished respect. Think about this in terms of economics. If a product is always on sale, always available, never in demand, its perceived value plummets. In the same way, when your time and energy are given away to someone who is not reciprocating, you're telling them without words that your value is low. And people respond to perceived value. Here's the other layer. The absence of attention can be far more powerful than its constant presence. Attention is like sunlight for the ego. Without it, the ego starts to shrink. If you've ever noticed how someone who used to ignore you suddenly becomes curious when you stop acknowledging them, that's not magic, that's psychology. The ego craves validation, and when it doesn't get it, it begins to question its own standing. That questioning creates the exact conditions for them to re-engage. Now you might be wondering, but won't she just move on if I stop giving her attention? Possibly. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If the only thing keeping her around is your constant feeding of her ego, she's not really with you, she's with the feeling you give her. And that's not a sustainable foundation for any relationship. If she moves on when you stop feeding her ego, it's because there was no genuine connection to begin with. Better to discover that now than waste months or years in a one-sided dynamic. When you remove your attention, you do two things at once. First, you reclaim your own energy, which you can reinvest into yourself, your goals, your fitness, your skills, your life. Second, you create a void in her world, and voids have power. People notice what's missing more than they notice what's present. It's why you only miss the sound of a clock when it stops ticking, or the hum of a fridge when it turns off. Her ego is used to the hum of your attention in the background. Remove it, and she feels the silence. But for this to work, it can't be half-hearted. You can't pull away for 2 days, then panic and flood her with messages. That's not strength. That's inconsistency. And inconsistency tells her that deep down, she still has the control. Real withdrawal of attention is a commitment. It's saying, I refuse to invest in someone who is not investing in me, and meaning it. Of course, none of this works if your self-worth is still tied to her response. The reason most men fail at this is because they're secretly hoping that by withdrawing attention, they'll trigger her to come running back, and when she doesn't, they crumble. That's not detachment, that's manipulation. True detachment says, whether she comes back or not, I'm still good. My value isn't dependent on her reaction. And paradoxically, that's exactly the energy that often draws someone back. It's also worth noting that withdrawing attention isn't about punishing her. It's about protecting your own mental and emotional state. You have to operate from a place of abundance, not scarcity. If you believe that she's the only woman you can get, then yes, pulling away will feel terrifying. But if you know your value, if you know there are other women who would be thrilled to have your attention, then you can step back without fear. The reality is, attention is one of the most valuable resources you have. It's more valuable than money, because you can always make more money, but you can never get back the time you've spent. And the way you spend your attention signals to the world how you value yourself. Spend it wisely, and people, including her, will treat it like something worth earning. Give it away freely to someone who isn't reciprocating, and you teach them to see it as worthless. There's a reason ancient philosophers talked about the discipline of withholding as a form of power. The Stoics, for example, believed that a man who could control his impulses, including the impulse to seek validation, was a man who could not be controlled by others. That's exactly what we're talking about here. If you can resist the urge to chase, to overcompensate, to keep pouring attention into a bottomless pit, you've already won the harder battle, the battle with yourself. And this is where the transformation happens. Because once you've broken the habit of feeding her ego with constant attention, you start to notice how much more you have to give, not just to her, but to yourself, to your purpose, to the people who actually appreciate it. You stop trying to win someone who's pulling away, and you start attracting people who are leaning in. In the end, the irony is almost poetic. The less you feed her ego, the more she's likely to notice you. The moment she realizes the stream of validation has dried up, she'll start to wonder where it went, and more importantly, why it went. That's when her ego begins to shrink, and the dynamic begins to shift. But whether she comes back or not, you've already shifted the most important thing, your own sense of self-worth. And that's the real win, so stop feeding her ego with attention she hasn't earned. Attention is a gift, not an obligation. The man who understands that doesn't just lower her ego, he elevates his own. Scarcity is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It shapes perception, it drives desire, and it dictates the way we value people and things. And here's the part most men overlook. When you're too available, you strip yourself of that power. You unintentionally tell her, I'm always here. You don't have to earn me. You don't have to chase. You don't have to invest. And in doing so, you erase the mystery, the tension, and the magnetism that come from being someone who's not easily acquired. Think about it. What do people line up for? What do they pay extra for? What do they brag about owning? Not the thing they can get anytime, anywhere, without effort, but the thing that's hard to get. the thing that requires patience, persistence, or even luck. That's not because humans are irrational. It's because scarcity triggers our survival instincts. When something is rare, we instinctively see it as valuable. And when something is abundant, we instinctively see it as less valuable. Now, in the context of relationships, scarcity isn't about playing games or pretending you're busy. It's about genuinely living a life that's full enough, purposeful enough, and self-directed enough that you're not constantly orbiting around one person. It's about having your own gravitational pull instead of being caught in hers. When a woman senses that you are scarce, not because you're avoiding her, but because you're deeply engaged in your own mission, the power dynamic begins to shift. She can't just assume you'll be there whenever she decides to turn her attention back to you. She starts to wonder where you are, what you're doing, and why you're not trying to fill every gap in communication. That wondering creates a pull. It reintroduces the tension that makes interactions exciting and unpredictable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If she believes she can have you at any time, she's less likely to prioritize you. This isn't about her being selfish or manipulative. It's about basic human nature. We tend to devalue what's overexposed to us. That's why your favorite song eventually becomes background noise if you play it on repeat. Scarcity is what makes something or someone worth noticing again. But scarcity has to be authentic. Forced scarcity, the kind where you're sitting at home staring at your phone trying to hold out for a few hours before replying, doesn't create respect. It creates suspicion. She can feel when you're still fixated on her, even if you're trying not to show it. Real scarcity is a byproduct of having priorities, responsibilities, and passions that don't revolve around her. And this is where many men fail. They want the effect of scarcity without the substance. They want her to chase them while they secretly keep chasing her in their mind. That's not how it works. For scarcity to be powerful, you have to genuinely be scarce in attention, in emotional investment, in availability, because your life is rich enough without her constant presence. The irony is that when you live this way, you become more attractive to everyone, not just to her. People are drawn to those who are self-directed, who have boundaries, who aren't eager to please at the cost of their own priorities. Scarcity signals that you're not desperate, and desperation is the fastest way to kill attraction. Let's make this practical. If you're always the one initiating contact, stop. If you're always dropping everything to respond instantly, stop. If you're constantly reshuffling your schedule to accommodate hers, stop. Not in a cold, vengeful way, but in a calm, confident way that says, I have a full life. I will fit you into it if it makes sense, but I will not dismantle it for you. When you start behaving like a scarce resource, you change the frame of the relationship. Instead of her seeing herself as the prize you're chasing, she begins to see you as the prize she needs to win over. That's the reversal. You're no longer auditioning for her approval. She's proving she's worth a place in your world. And here's the deeper layer most men don't see. Scarcity doesn't just affect her perception of you, it changes your perception of yourself. When you stop giving yourself away freely, when you start protecting your time and energy, you begin to see your own value differently. You stop asking, why isn't she giving me attention? And start asking, why am I giving my attention to someone who isn't earning it? That mental shift is where real power begins. Scarcity also forces her to experience you in a way she can't if you're always present. It creates space for her to miss you, to imagine you, to wonder what you're doing. That imagination is powerful because it allows her to project her own curiosity and desire onto you, and that's far more compelling than anything you could tell her outright. But you have to be willing to tolerate the discomfort that comes with this shift. When you go from over-availability to scarcity, she may test you. She may pull away further, delay responses, or act indifferent. That's normal. She's used to the old dynamic. She's used to you being there on demand, and now that you're not, she has to recalibrate. The men who fail are the ones who can't handle that initial pushback and go running back into the old pattern. The men who succeed are the ones who stay the course, who keep living their life, keep focusing on their mission, and let her response be just that, her response. Not a signal to panic, not a sign of rejection, but simply her process of adjusting to the new dynamic. One of the most important things to understand is that scarcity isn't about being aloof for the sake of ego. It's about creating the conditions where respect can grow. Respect requires distance. It requires that each person in the relationship sees the other as independent and valuable on their own. If you collapse all that space by being constantly available, you eliminate the possibility for that respect to deepen. So, you reverse the power dynamic by becoming scarce, not as a punishment, not as a tactic, but as a natural byproduct of living a life that doesn't hinge on her attention. You show her through your actions that you are a man who cannot be taken for granted, that if she wants your time, your presence, and your focus, she has to bring value to the table. And when you hold yourself to that standard, she has two choices: step up or step aside. Either way, you win. Because you're no longer trapped in the exhausting cycle of chasing someone who's half interested. You're no longer trading your self-respect for fleeting moments of her approval. You've taken your attention, your most valuable currency, and put it back in your own hands. And when you do that, something incredible happens. You stop fearing loss, you stop playing not to lose, and you start living to win. That shift is magnetic. It's what turns men from background noise into a signal that can't be ignored. So understand this: your value is not proven by your constant presence. It's amplified by your selective presence. The less accessible you are, the more she'll value the moments when you are accessible. And when she values those moments, the entire dynamic changes. Make her earn your presence. Make her earn your time. Make her earn the version of you that doesn't just give himself away to anyone. Because when you become scarce in the right way, you don't just reverse the power dynamic, you redefine it. And that redefinition is the difference between being a man she takes for granted and a man she can't stop thinking about. One of the fastest ways to lose leverage in any relationship, and especially with a woman whose ego you're trying to balance, is to lose your emotional composure. I don't care how much you've worked on becoming scarce or how disciplined you've been in pulling back your attention. If you crumble emotionally the moment she pulls away, ignores you, or pushes your buttons, all that work collapses instantly. Because emotional self-control is the backbone of masculine presence. Without it, every other strategy becomes hollow. Let's be clear, I'm not telling you to become a robot. Emotional composure isn't about feeling nothing. It's about mastering how and when you express what you feel. It's about refusing to let your internal state be dictated by someone else's actions. That is the truest form of power in human interaction, not dominance through aggression, but stability through self-control. Think about how most men react when they feel a woman slipping away. They text more often. They double down on compliments. They demand explanations. They try to have the talk out of panic rather than clarity. And when none of that works, they escalate into frustration, sarcasm, or even anger. Every one of those reactions is a signal that their emotional state is dependent on her validation. And the moment she sees that, she knows she has you. When you lose emotional composure, you shift the power dynamic in her favor. Why? Because power in relationships often comes down to one simple question: who is more emotionally invested? If she sees that she can make you anxious, make you overthink, make you react, she understands that your feelings are tethered to her behavior. And that understanding fuels her ego. On the other hand, when you maintain your composure, when you can face the same moments of silence, distance, or rejection without crumbling, You communicate something entirely different. You communicate that you are self-contained, that your mood, your confidence, your sense of worth are not up for negotiation. And that makes you infinitely more attractive and more respected. This isn't just about attraction, it's about boundaries. Emotional composure says, I am willing to engage with you, but not at the cost of my self-respect. It's the difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is impulsive. It's a reflex driven by insecurity or fear. Response is deliberate. It's rooted in principle. When you respond rather than react, you create stability in the interaction, even if she's being unstable. Now, here's the paradox. A lot of men think that emotional composure is about holding everything inside. They think it's about suppressing their emotions, but suppression is not the same as control. Suppression is a pressure cooker. Eventually, it explodes. Control is knowing your emotions well enough to choose how to act on them. That choice is what gives you influence, both over yourself and over the dynamic between you. When a woman sees that you can handle her pulling back without chasing, that you can handle her being cold without becoming defensive, that you can handle her tests without flinching, she's forced to reassess you. Why? Because so many men fail those tests. They let their emotions drive their behavior, and in doing so, they reveal their dependence. You stand out when you don't, and make no mistake, sometimes those moments where she's ignoring you, being dismissive, or acting disinterested aren't about malice. They're about testing, consciously or unconsciously, the strength of your frame. She wants to see what happens if she withdraws a little. Do you collapse? Do you start pleading? Do you start trying to convince her of your value? Or do you calmly keep living your life unshaken? If you can't remain composed, you teach her that you're reactive, that your emotions are at the mercy of her approval. That's not leadership energy, that's follower energy, and a woman will never fully respect or feel long-term attraction to a man who is emotionally dependent on her mood swings. So how do you develop this composure? You start by becoming aware of your triggers. What specifically causes you to spiral? Is it the silence? Is it a delayed response? Is it seeing her post something on social media that makes you wonder who she's with? Those are the moments where most men fail. They see something, they feel the spike of insecurity, and they act immediately. They try to regain control by forcing connection, and every time they do, they give away more control. The key is to create space between the trigger and your response. That space is where composure lives. You take a breath, you remind yourself of your principles. You ask, if I act on this impulse, am I reinforcing my value, or am I undermining it? Most of the time, when you pause to think, you'll realize that doing nothing is actually the strongest move you can make. You also have to build a life outside of her that is strong enough to absorb emotional turbulence without throwing you off course. If the only source of excitement, validation, or purpose in your life is her, you will inevitably overreact when that source is threatened. But if your life is full with work you care about, with friendships, with hobbies, with physical goals, you have a stabilizing foundation. You can take the emotional hit without losing your center. And let's talk about perception. Emotional composure doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how you're seen. People instinctively respect those who don't break under pressure. It's why we admire great leaders in crises. They can face chaos without broadcasting panic. The same applies here. A woman will respect you more when she sees that you don't flinch at the first sign of challenge. She will take you more seriously when she knows you won't be easily swayed by her moods or tactics. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. Composure is compatible with warmth. You can be caring without being clingy. You can be affectionate without being desperate. The difference lies in where your behavior comes from. If it comes from a place of grounded confidence, it reads as strength. If it comes from a place of fear or neediness, it reads as weakness. There's also a subtle power in not showing all of your emotional cards. When you react instantly to everything she does, she can map you. She knows exactly which buttons to press to get the outcome she wants. But when you're composed, when you reveal your emotions selectively and intentionally, you remain unpredictable. And unpredictability, the healthy kind, keeps attraction alive. Over time, composure rewires the dynamic. She begins to see you not as someone to toy with, but as someone to take seriously. She realizes she can't control you through silence or withdrawal. She starts to approach you differently, because she understands that you're not going to play into the emotional tug-of-war. And ironically, that often leads her to engage more openly and consistently, because the games no longer work. But here's the catch: you can't fake this. Women are highly attuned to emotional undercurrents. If you're pretending to be composed while internally losing it, she'll sense the disconnect. Composure has to be real. It has to come from a deep belief that you are fine with or without her. And that belief can only be built by genuinely valuing yourself and your life enough that her opinion doesn't define you. So yes, reverse the power dynamic by becoming scarce. Stop feeding her ego with constant attention. But none of that will matter if you can't hold your emotional ground when she tests you. Because the man who stays calm in the storm is the man who earns respect long after the storm has passed. If you take nothing else from this, remember this: the moment you let someone else dictate your emotional state, you've given them control. The moment you decide that your emotions are yours to govern, you've taken it back. And in the game of relationships, that's the control that matters most.